The last time I saw my father alive, he taught me that real warriors know when to fight and when to wait. I just never thought I'd be waiting this long." Brooklyn Hayes pressed her paint-stained fingers against the canvas, adding the final shadow to her father's dress uniform. 3 months of work. And his eyes still weren't quite right, that mix of strength and gentleness she remembered from their last video call before Syria. The art room at Ridgemont High was empty at 7 a.m., just how she liked it. Natural light streaming through tall windows, no whispers following her down the hallways, no reminders that she was the girl from base housing in a school full of beach mansions. "That's incredible," a voice said from the doorway. "If you're feeling that rush of what's going to happen next, hit that like button. It really helps more people discover these stories. And if you want to share where you're watching from, drop it in the comments below. For those who want to support more stories like this one, there's a thanks button right under this video. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps me bring you more inspiring tales of courage and standing up for what's right. Thank you for being here. Now, let's see what happens when push comes to shove." Brooklyn's hand jerked, leaving a dark smear across the medal she'd just finished. She turned to find Tyler Morrison leaning against the frame, his Letterman jacket catching the morning sun like he'd staged it. 6'3" of Virginia Beach royalty, the kind of boy whose father owned half the commercial real estate in town and whose touchdown passes made the local news. "Thanks," she said, turning back to assess the damage. "Fixable, but annoying." "No, seriously." His footsteps crossed the room, expensive sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "I didn't know you could. Is that your dad?" The question hung between them like a landmine. Everyone at Ridgemont knew about Lieutenant Colonel James Hayes. How could they not? The flag at half-staff 5 years ago. The memorial plaque by the gym. The way teachers still got that careful look when they called her name on the first day of class. "Yeah," Brooklyn said simply, dipping her brush in turpentine. Tyler moved closer, and she caught his cologne, something expensive that probably cost more than her monthly art supplies. "Listen, Brooklyn, I was wondering, I'm kind of in the middle of something." She kept her eyes on the canvas, fixing the smear with small, precise strokes. "Right, yeah, of course." He shifted his weight, and she could feel him gathering himself for another attempt. "It's just, homecoming's in 2 weeks, and I thought maybe you'd want to go with me." The brush stopped moving. In the reflection of the window, she could see his confident smile, the kind that had probably never heard no from a girl before. Brooklyn set down her brush carefully, buying time. She'd been to 8 schools in 16 years, learned to read the social hierarchies like military intelligence briefings. Tyler Morrison asking her to homecoming wasn't romantic, it was strategic. The mysterious new girl, the challenge, the one who didn't giggle when he walked by. "That's really nice of you," she said, finally turning to face him. "But I can't. I've got the Congressional Art Competition deadline right after. And, are you serious?" His smile flickered like a TV losing signal. "You're turning me down for homework." "It's not homework, it's... whatever." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "I get it. You think you're too good for us regular people. Right? Too smart, too talented, too... Tyler, that's not... Save it." He was already backing toward the door, his face shifting through emotions like a slot machine confusion. Anger. Something darker. "You know what your problem is? You live in that shitty base housing and act like you're better than everyone. Newsflash, your dad being dead doesn't make you special." The words hit like shrapnel. Brooklyn's hand tightened on the brush handle, her mother's voice echoing in her head. Never let them see you break. Never give them that power. Tyler was gone before she could respond, leaving only the echo of the slamming door and the smell of his cologne mixing with turpentine. Brooklyn stood there for a long moment, staring at her father's painted eyes, then carefully set down her brush and walked to the window. From 3 stories up, she could see the parking lot filling with students, Tyler's red Mustang GT sliding into his reserved spot near the gym. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just made the worst enemy of her life. The first sign of war came through Instagram. Brooklyn discovered it during lunch, sitting in her usual spot in the library where she could eat without the cafeteria's social minefield. Jaden Park, the only other military kid in her AP Physics class, slid his phone across the table with the expression of someone delivering bad news to a commanding officer. "You need to see this," he said quietly. The account was called @Brooklyn's Poor Life, created that morning. Already 57 followers. The profile picture was a zoomed-in shot of her dad's memorial bracelet, the one she never took off. The first post was a photo taken through the art room door, her working on the painting. Time-stamped 7:03 a.m. "When you're so poor, you have to come to school early for the free heating. Military welfare at its finest. Poor girl problems. #dead dad money." The comments were worse. Brooklyn recognized some of the usernames kids from her classes. Tyler's inner circle. They dissected everything from her thrift store jeans to the way she brought lunch from home instead of buying it. Someone had even calculated how much her dad's death benefits probably were. Posted it like a salary review. "Brooklyn, you need to report this," Jaden said. He was smaller than most juniors, all sharp angles and nervous energy, but his eyes held the same steel she'd seen in career military families. "This is targeted harassment." She handed back the phone. "By Monday, there'll be 3 more accounts. By Wednesday, they'll have TikToks. Trust me, I've seen this playbook before. This isn't some random base school. Ridgemont has policies. Ridgemont's football team is 3-0, heading for state championships." Brooklyn pulled out her calculus homework, needing something solid and logical to focus on. "You really think they're going to discipline their star quarterback over some Instagram posts?" Jaden's silence was answer enough. They both understood the mathematics of high school power talent plus money equals immunity. But he pulled out his laptop anyway, fingers flying across the keyboard with the intensity of someone who'd learned to fight back with different weapons. "What are you doing?" "Nothing traceable," he said. And there was something in his smile that reminded her why military kids made dangerous enemies. They'd learned strategy at the dinner table, absorbed operational security with their bedtime stories. Just documenting. You never know when intel might be useful. By the end of the week, the digital assault had evolved into psychological warfare. Brooklyn found her locker decorated with fake food stamp applications. "Charity case," written across her calculus book in permanent marker. Someone had photoshopped her face onto welfare advertisements and printed dozens of copies, leaving them on every desk she'd sit at throughout the day. The art room, her sanctuary, was infiltrated too, her painting supplies mysteriously moved. Works in progress, subtly sabotaged. But it was Caitlin Chen's whisper campaign that cut deepest. "I heard she sleeps with teachers for grades," Caitlin told anyone who'd listen, her voice carrying that perfect pitch of fake concern. "I mean, how else does base housing trash get straight A's? My dad says those military families are all about working the system." Brooklyn learned to move through the hallways like she was crossing hostile territory quick, quiet, alert. She timed her routes to avoid Tyler's crew, ate lunch in empty classrooms, arrived early and left late. The exhaustion was bone deep, the kind that reminded her of the months after her father's funeral, when every day felt like swimming through concrete. It was Ms. Rodriguez who finally broke the silence. "Brooklyn, stay after class," the art teacher said on Friday afternoon, her voice gentle but firm, when the room emptied. Ms. Rodriguez pulled up a chair next to Brooklyn's easel, where she was adding details to her father's ribbons. The teacher studied the painting for a long moment, and Brooklyn saw her notice the small acts of vandalism, the pencil marks someone had added to the background, the tiny tears in the canvas edges where someone had tested its strength. "I was married to a Marine once," Ms. Rodriguez said quietly. "He used to say the hardest battles were the ones nobody could see." Brooklyn's hand stilled on the brush. "I know what's happening." The teacher continued. "I've seen the posts, heard the rumors. I've also seen how you handle it with more grace than most adults could manage. But, Brooklyn, you don't have to fight this alone." "Respectfully, Ms. Rodriguez, yes, I do." Brooklyn set down her brush, choosing her words carefully. "You report it officially, and it becomes a thing. My mom has to get involved. Has to take time off from training pilots who might save lives someday. The school has to investigate, which means Tyler's dad throws his weight around. Probably gets you in trouble for overreacting. Meanwhile, the bullying gets worse because now I'm not just poor, I'm a snitch, too." Ms. Rodriguez's expression cycled through frustration, admiration, and deep sadness. "So what's your plan? Just endure." "My mom says there are two kinds of strength," Brooklyn replied, returning to her painting. "The kind that strikes back, and the kind that outlasts. Right now, I'm outlasting." But as she added another medal to her father's uniform, Brooklyn wondered how much more she could take before outlasting turned into drowning. The first time it turned physical was almost a relief. Brooklyn was loading her art supplies into her beat-up Honda Civic when she heard footsteps behind her. The parking lot was nearly empty, that golden hour between school and football practice when most students had cleared out. She turned to find Madison Wells and two other cheerleaders forming a semicircle around her. "Oops," Madison said, her voice sugar-sweet as she knocked Brooklyn's box of paints to the ground. Tubes scattered across the asphalt. Expensive oils she'd saved for months to buy rolling toward the storm drain. "How clumsy of me." Brooklyn knelt to gather them, keeping her breathing steady. One tube of cadmium red, $32. Ultramarine blue, $28. Each one represented hours of babysitting on base, tutoring younger kids in math, saving every penny for her competition piece. A designer heel came down on a tube of titanium white, grinding it into the pavement with deliberate pressure. "You know," Madison continued, "Tyler was just trying to be nice. Nobody's ever turned him down before. You embarrassed him." "He embarrassed himself," Brooklyn said quietly, rescuing what supplies she could. The heel pressed harder, paint oozing across the asphalt like blood. "What was that?" Brooklyn stood slowly, meeting Madison's eyes. The cheerleader was everything Ridgemont valued: blonde, wealthy, destined for a sorority at whatever SEC school her father's donations could buy. But Brooklyn had stared down drill sergeants at 8 years old, had kept her composure while folding the flag at her father's funeral. A mean girl in designer clothes wasn't going to break her. "I said, he embarrassed himself. Now, If you'll excuse me, the slap came fast. Madison's manicured hand connecting with Brooklyn's cheek hard enough to snap her head sideways. The parking lot rang with silence after, even the distant sounds of football practice seeming to pause. Brooklyn touched her cheek, feeling the heat bloom across her skin. Part of her, the part that had trained in base self-defense classes since she was 12, wanted to demonstrate exactly what happened when you hit someone who'd learned to fight from people who did it for a living. But her father's voice was stronger. Real warriors know when to fight and when to wait. "Feel better?" Brooklyn asked calmly. Madison's perfect face twisted with frustration. She'd wanted tears, wanted fear, wanted some sign that she'd won. Instead, Brooklyn bent down, picked up her salvageable supplies, and walked to her car without another word, in the driver's seat. She allowed herself 30 seconds of shaking hands before starting the engine. In the rearview mirror, she could see Madison still standing there, looking somehow smaller despite her fury. That night, Brooklyn's mom noticed the bruise during their weekly video call from the base. Commander Michelle Hayes had her daughter's same sharp eyes, the kind that could spot an aircraft malfunction at 5,000 feet or a lie at 5 inches. "Training accident," Brooklyn said smoothly. "You know how competitive art can be." Her mother's expression suggested she wasn't buying it. But after 17 years of military marriage and 5 of single parenthood, she'd learned to pick her battles too. "You'd tell me if you needed me." "Right. Brooke. Always. Mom." But as they talked about flight schedules and Thanksgiving plans, Brooklyn wondered if that was becoming another casualty of Tyler Morrison's war. Her ability to tell the truth to the one person who'd always had her six. The escalation came with calculated precision, like someone had read a field manual on psychological operations. Brooklyn arrived Monday morning to find her art competition piece destroyed. Not just damaged, methodically ruined. Someone had poured industrial bleach across the canvas. The chemical reaction eating through 3 months of work, like acid through skin. Her father's face, so carefully rendered, was now a horror movie effect. Features dissolved into an unrecognizable mess. She stood in the doorway of the art room, backpack sliding off her shoulder as the devastation registered. Other students filtered past, some gasping, others smirking, most just grateful it wasn't their work melting off the easel. "Oh my God," someone said, and Brooklyn turned to find Connor Bradley, Tyler's best friend since elementary school, looking genuinely shocked. "Brooklyn, it's fine," she heard herself say. Though nothing about it was fine. The competition deadline was in 2 weeks. Even if she worked every waking hour, she couldn't recreate 3 months of detail, her scholarship chances, her college applications, her entire future all dissolved like her father's painted eyes. Connor shifted uncomfortably, his usual easy confidence nowhere to be found. "Look, he's going through some stuff. His parents are getting divorced, and don't." The word came out sharper than intended. "Just don't." She walked to the ruined canvas, chemical fumes making her eyes water, or maybe that was something else. Behind her, she heard Connor leave, his footsteps heavy with whatever burden Tyler's friendship had become. Ms. Rodriguez found her there an hour later, sitting on the floor, surrounded by paint-stained drop cloths, staring at nothing. "We have security cameras," the teacher said gently. "We can—" "The cameras don't cover this corner. Somehow, whoever did this knew that." Brooklyn's voice sounded hollow, even to herself. Just like they knew exactly which chemicals would react with oil paint. just like they knew this piece was my competition entry. Ms. Rodriguez knelt beside her, and Brooklyn saw tears in her teacher's eyes. "This has gone too far. I'm calling your mother." "No," Brooklyn stood, decision crystallizing like grief into purpose. "I'm starting over, today. The competition is in 2 weeks. That's impossible." My dad used to say impossible was just another word for hard. Brooklyn moved to the supply cabinet, pulling out a fresh canvas. "Besides, I've got something now that I didn't have before." "What's that?" Brooklyn stretched the canvas with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite everything. "Rage." If this reminds you of someone who fought their battles alone, who turned pain into purpose when the world tried to break them, hold that memory close. Sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones who choose to create rather than destroy. The new painting came alive with a fever dream intensity. Brooklyn worked 18-hour days, skipping classes she could afford to miss, mainlining coffee and determination. This version was different, rawer, more honest. Her father's dress uniform was there, but now it told the whole story. The shadows held memories of deployment goodbyes. The highlights caught the tears she'd hidden at his funeral. The medals seemed to pulse with the weight of sacrifice. Word spread through Ridgemont like wildfire. The girl who'd been destroyed was building something from the ashes. Students snuck into the art room to watch her work, and even some of Tyler's crew seemed unsettled by her transformation. She painted like someone possessed, like someone with nothing left to lose. It was during one of these marathon sessions that Connor Bradley appeared again, this time with a USB drive. "I can't watch this anymore," he said simply, placing the drive on her paint-stained workstation. "That's everything. Screenshots, videos, planning texts. Tyler's been spiraling since his mom left. But this, what he's planning for Friday, I'm done." Brooklyn looked at the drive, then at Connor's face. He'd been Tyler's shadow since they were kids, the one who laughed at his jokes and cleaned up his messes. Walking away from that brotherhood was its own kind of courage. "Why?" she asked. Connor met her eyes, and she saw something broken there, some weight he'd been carrying. "Because my sister was bullied in middle school, different state, before we moved here. She almost—" He cleared his throat. "I couldn't help her then. Maybe I can help you now." After he left, Brooklyn plugged in the drive with trembling fingers. The files opened like a playbook of cruelty group chats, planning each harassment. Photos taken without her knowledge. Even recordings of Tyler ranting about teaching the base rat her place. But it was the final folder that made her blood freeze. Operation Flagpole, November 22nd. The plan was detailed with disturbing precision. They'd ambush her after art class, drag her to the front lawn where the whole school could see. The flagpole, ropes, signs, a live stream to make it go viral. Tyler's messages were increasingly unhinged, talking about showing everyone what happens when trash doesn't know its place. Brooklyn stared at the screen, her father's words echoing differently now. Real warriors know when to fight and when to wait. She'd been waiting, building, enduring. But Friday was in 3 days, and sometimes waiting turned into enabling. Sometimes outlasting meant letting them escalate until someone got hurt, really hurt. The kind of hurt that made headlines and ruined lives on both sides of the violence. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over her mother's contact. One call, and Commander Hayes would rain down official hell. Base security, military, lawyers, the whole weight of the United States Navy protecting its own. But Brooklyn looked at her painting, her father's eyes finally right. That mix of strength and gentleness captured in oil and truth, and made a different choice. She opened the encrypted messaging app Jaden had installed weeks ago, the one he used for his documentation project. "I need everything you've collected," she typed. "And I need you to be ready to broadcast it." His response was immediate. "When?" "Friday. They want to go viral. Let's give them viral." As she returned to her painting, adding final touches that would complete her competition piece, Brooklyn felt something shift inside her. The waiting was almost over. Friday would come with its violence and spectacle, its attempt to break what couldn't be broken. What Tyler Morrison didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that Brooklyn Hayes wasn't just a military kid. She was her mother's daughter, strategic and precise. She was her father's legacy, knowing exactly when to strike. And she was an artist, about to paint her masterpiece in a medium none of them expected. The trap was set. The bait was herself. And the countdown to Friday had begun. Outside the art room windows, storm clouds gathered over Virginia Beach, promising the kind of weather that turned high school cruelty into something darker. Brooklyn painted through it all, each brushstroke counting down to the moment when everything would change. The morning of November 22nd arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind that made the air thick and electric, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Brooklyn stood before her completed painting in the empty art room, watching sunrise light dance across her father's medals. She'd finished at 3 a.m., her hands cramped and paint-stained. But the work was everything she'd hoped, a love letter to sacrifice, a testament to endurance, a promise that some things couldn't be destroyed, no matter how hard anyone tried. "It's beautiful," Jaden said from the doorway, laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "You ready for this?" She touched her father's memorial bracelet, a gesture that had become prayer and armor combined. "My mom's in a classified briefing all day. Won't even have her phone." "Brooklyn, maybe we should—" "No backing out now." She carefully wrapped the painting, protecting it for transport to the competition. "You have everything set up." Jaden's fingers danced across his phone screen. "Multiple backup streams, cloud storage, automatic distribution lists. When this goes live, it goes everywhere: local news, military networks, school board emails, the whole package. And if they take my phone, dead man switch. If you don't input the code every hour, everything releases automatically." He paused, studying her face. "You know, once this starts, there's no controlling where it goes, right?" Brooklyn thought of Connor's USB drive hidden in her car, of Madison's slap still ghost-burning on her cheek, of 3 months of work dissolved in bleach. Mostly, she thought of Tyler's increasingly unhinged messages, the way his rage had transformed from wounded pride to something genuinely dangerous. "Some battles choose you," she said quietly. "Dad taught me that." The day unfolded with terrible normalcy. Classes blurred together, teachers droning about topics that seemed impossibly distant from the countdown in Brooklyn's head. She input Jaden's safety code between periods, ate lunch in the library, moved through the halls like a ghost, preparing for its own haunting. Tyler was everywhere, and nowhere his presence felt, but not seen. Like a predator, saving energy for the strike. His crew, however, was visible and restless. She caught them watching her, whispering in clusters, checking phones with the anticipation of kids waiting for a concert to start. At 2:45, Brooklyn headed to the art room for final period. Ms. Rodriguez was at a district meeting conveniently scheduled, no doubt leaving a substitute who barely looked up from his phone. She packed her painting carefully, said goodbye to the space that had been sanctuary and battlefield both, and walked into the hallway at 3:10 exactly. They were waiting, 8 of them, letter jackets like armor, faces bright with the particular cruelty of those who've never faced real consequences. Tyler stood at their center, and Brooklyn saw with clinical detachment that Connor's warnings had been understated. His eyes held the wild light of someone who'd crossed from bullying into something worse, someone who'd fed their pain with steroids and stimulants until it became monstrous. "Going somewhere?" Tyler asked, voice artificially calm. Brooklyn kept walking. The exit was 50 feet away. She'd made it 15 before they surrounded her, a practiced maneuver that spoke of planning and anticipation. Her painting case was lifted from her hands with mock gentleness. "Careful with that," Madison cooed, appearing from nowhere. "Wouldn't want another accident." The whole thing had the feel of choreography, Tyler's crew moving her toward the front lawn with subtle pressure. Other students following like audiences to an execution. Phones already out and recording. Brooklyn didn't resist. Every step was evidence. Every witness. Another angle of documentation. The flagpole stood in the center of Ridgemont's manicured lawn, tall and proud, with the American flag snapping in the warm breeze. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were about to assault a military child beneath the symbol her father had died defending. "You know what your problem is." Tyler circled her as they reached the flagpole, his movements jerky and aggressive. "You think you're special. Think your dead daddy makes you better than us." "I never said that," Brooklyn replied evenly. "You didn't have to." The calm shattered. Tyler's voice cracking with rage. "Walking around here like you own the place. Too good to date me. Too good to know your place. Too good to stay down when we put you there." The rope appeared in his hands, thick, nautical grade, the kind used for boat moorings. Brooklyn's heart rate spiked, but she kept her breathing steady. Her father's training anchoring her. Fear is data, not destiny. Use it. Don't let it use you. "Hold her," Tyler commanded. Mason and another player grabbed her arms. Not gently. Brooklyn could have fought years of base self-defense classes, had taught her how to break holds, target vulnerable points, turn their strength against them. But every second of this was being recorded, and she needed them to hang themselves with their own rope. "Tyler, man, maybe we should," one of the younger players started. "Shut up," Tyler wheeled on him. "You want to be next? Want to join welfare queen here?" The rope bit into her wrists as they bound her to the flagpole, pulling her arms behind her around the metal. Someone she couldn't see who hung a cardboard sign around her neck. She didn't need to read it to know what it said. The crowd had grown to over 200 students, a sea of phones capturing every moment. "Higher," Madison commanded. "She needs to be where everyone can see." They hoisted her up, rope cutting into her ribs, until her feet barely touched the ground. The strain on her shoulders was immediate and burning. Brooklyn focused on her breathing, on staying conscious, on the knowledge that Jaden was out there somewhere, making sure every second was preserved. Tyler stepped back to admire his work, then pulled out spray paint. "Time for some decorating." The paint was cold against her shirt, chemical smell making her eyes water. He took his time, writing words she refused to internalize, turning her into a living graffiti of his rage. The crowd had gone eerily quiet, the festive atmosphere curdling into something uncomfortable. Even some of Tyler's supporters looked uneasy. "This," Tyler announced, turning to address the crowd like a demented preacher, "is what happens when trash forgets where it belongs. When base rats think they can come to our school, take our scholarships, act like they're Tyler Morrison, you need to stop." The voice cut through his rant like a blade. Brooklyn craned her neck to see Ms. Rodriguez pushing through the crowd, her face a mask of controlled fury. Behind her, impossibly, was Connor Bradley and what looked like 2 school security guards. "Get her down, now," Ms. Rodriguez commanded. Tyler laughed, high and unstable. "Or, what, you'll give me detention? My dad owns half this town. You're just another teacher who—" The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A rhythmic thunder that started low and built to overwhelming. The distinctive whop, whop, whop of military helicopters. Not 1 or 2 for a training exercise, but multiple aircraft approaching in tactical formation. The crowd's phones swung skyward as 5 MH-60R Seahawks crested the tree line, black against the afternoon sky like avenging angels. They circled the school once, twice. Rotors washing the carefully maintained lawn into chaos, the American flag whipping violent and wild. Tyler's face went white. "What the—" The lead helicopter descended toward the football field, low enough that everyone could see the naval aviation insignia, the door gunner positions. The fact that this wasn't some medical transport or news chopper, but military aircraft on a mission. It hovered 30 feet up as a figure appeared in the door, small, precise, wearing a flight suit that bore Commander's insignia. Brooklyn's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back for months. "Mom." Commander Michelle Hayes fast-roped down like she'd done it 1,000 times, which she had. Though usually in combat zones, not suburban high schools, she hit the ground in a perfect tactical crouch, rising smooth and lethal, every inch the warrior who'd earned her wings in Iraq and Afghanistan. She didn't run. Warriors never ran when walking sent a stronger message. The crowd parted like water. 300 teenagers suddenly remembering that actions had consequences, and adults existed who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Cut my daughter down!" Each word was carved from ice, delivered in the command voice that had directed pilots through combat missions. "Now!" Tyler's crew scattered like roaches, but Mason and 2 others frantically worked to lower Brooklyn, their fingers fumbling with knots tied by their own hands. Miss Rodriguez was there with scissors, slicing through rope as Commander Hayes reached them. "I've got you, baby," her mother whispered, catching Brooklyn as she sagged forward. "I've got you." But the commander's gentleness lasted exactly as long as it took to ensure Brooklyn could stand. Then she turned to Tyler Morrison with the expression of someone who'd faced down enemy fire and found suburban bullies distinctly unimpressive. "You filmed yourself committing assault," she said conversationally. "Battery, false imprisonment, destruction of property, harassment. That's before we get to the federal charges for assaulting a military dependent, which puts you under NCIS jurisdiction. You can't, my father. Your father is currently in FBI custody," Commander Hayes continued, checking her watch. "Turns out someone sent them a very interesting package about money laundering through development projects. Anonymous tip, but thoroughly documented." Brooklyn looked at Jaden through the crowd, saw him typing furiously on his laptop. He'd done more than just prepare broadcasts. He'd been digging into Morrison development for weeks, following financial breadcrumbs with the determination of someone who'd learned that information was ammunition. The remaining helicopters had landed on the football field, disgorging what looked like JAG officers and NCIS agents. They moved through the crowd with professional efficiency, taking statements, securing phones, treating the entire scene like what it was, a crime scene. "This is ridiculous," Tyler shouted, panic replacing rage. "It was just a prank. Nobody got hurt." Commander Hayes stepped closer, and even Brooklyn shivered at her expression. "My daughter has bruises around her ribs that say otherwise. But more than that, you've been conducting a campaign of harassment for weeks, destroying her property, encouraging others to assault her, creating a hostile environment that denied her equal access to education." "Mom," Brooklyn said quietly, "how did you know?" Her mother's expression softened for a moment. "Your friend Jaden is remarkably resourceful. When the live stream hit military channels, he made sure it included everything, weeks of documentation, the planning messages, all of it. I was in a briefing with the base commander and the Pentagon liaison. We were wheels up in 10 minutes. She turned back to Tyler, who was now flanked by NCIS agents. "You wanted to go viral, congratulations. You're about to become the face of why the military takes protection of dependents seriously. Every base in the country will know your name." As they led Tyler away, he turned back one last time. The golden boy was gone, replaced by a scared 18-year-old who'd just realized his father's money couldn't fix everything. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time. It might have been genuine. Brooklyn didn't respond. Apologies didn't unmake months of torment, didn't restore her destroyed painting, didn't give back the sense of safety he'd stolen. But as she leaned against her mother, surrounded by the smell of aviation fuel and justice, she felt something better than vindication. She felt free. The aftermath rippled through Ridgemont like a tsunami in reverse, pulling away facades to reveal the rot beneath. Morrison Development collapsed within a week. The FBI investigation uncovering years of fraud that Tyler's harassment had inadvertently exposed. Madison Wells and 3 others faced juvenile charges, their college prospects evaporating like spray paint in rain. The school board, suddenly discovering backbone in the face of federal oversight, implemented sweeping anti-bullying measures with actual teeth. But it was the quieter changes that meant more to Brooklyn. The way kids nodded at her in the halls with genuine respect, how Ms. Rodriguez fought to have her original painting score count for the competition, arguing successfully that the destroyed version was part of the artistic journey. The scholarship offers that poured in, not just for her art, but for her story, though she chose the Naval Academy in the end, following both parents' footsteps in her own way. Connor Bradley found her the day before Thanksgiving, when she was packing up her art supplies for the last time. "I know it doesn't fix anything," he said, "but I'm testifying. At all the hearings, Tyler was my friend. But what he became, what I let him become, I should have stopped it sooner." "You stopped it when it mattered," Brooklyn replied, "and meant it. That takes courage. Not as much as facing it alone for months." He paused at the door. "I hope you know you've changed things here, not just the rules, but how we see strength, what it actually looks like." That evening, Brooklyn sat with her mother on the base housing porch, watching planes take off into the sunset. The painting, her second one, born from pain and determination, had won the congressional competition. It would hang in the Capitol for a year, her father's sacrifice witnessed by thousands. "I'm proud of you," Commander Hayes said quietly, "but I'm also sorry. You shouldn't have had to be that strong." Dad always said the hardest battles were the ones nobody could see, Brooklyn replied. I just made mine visible. Her mother smiled, sad and proud at once. He would have fast-roped down himself, you know, probably would have brought the whole squadron. They sat in comfortable silence, military jets painting contrails across the sky like brushstrokes on an endless canvas. Brooklyn thought about Tyler, facing federal charges and the collapse of everything he'd known. She thought about the students who'd stood by recording, complicit in their silence until silence became impossible. Mostly. She thought about the next girl who'd walk into Ridgemont, different and defiant, and how maybe, just maybe, that girl would find a softer landing. "Mom," Brooklyn asked, as stars began to appear, "when you were in that helicopter, coming to get me, what were you thinking?" Sometimes they carry paintbrushes and patience and the unbreakable will to outlast any storm. Sometimes victory looks like survival transformed into art. And sometimes, just sometimes, the base housing kid gets to watch her bullies face justice delivered by 5 black helicopters and the fury of a mother who'd crossed oceans to protect what she loved. But Brooklyn didn't see him. She was looking forward, toward cockpits and carrier decks and a future painted in shades of possibility. Her father's daughter, her mother's pride, unbroken, unbowed, unstoppable, a warrior at last. The story of Brooklyn Hayes became legend at Ridgemont, passed down in whispers and warnings. They called it The Day the Helicopters Came. And every September, new students heard the tale not from teachers, but from kids who'd witnessed what happened when cruelty met consequence. Jaden Park received a full scholarship to MIT, his documentation skills catching the attention of cybersecurity recruiters. He kept a photo on his desk, him and Brooklyn at graduation, both in dress whites. Proof that military kids could rewrite their own stories. Ms. Rodriguez became the district's anti-bullying coordinator, armed with federal backing and Brooklyn's story. She kept a print of that twice-created painting in her office, a reminder that destruction could birth something stronger, more beautiful than what came before. Tyler's friends scattered to different futures, some learning from their choices, others simply learning to hide their cruelty better. But Mason Wells surprised everyone by joining the Navy after community college, seeking something his father's money couldn't buy, redemption earned through service. Years later, when Commander Brooklyn Hayes led her own squadron, she kept her father's memorial bracelet in her flight suit pocket. On difficult days, she'd touch it and remember not the pain of those months at Ridgemont, but the moment she'd chosen to paint instead of punish, to document instead of destroy, to wait for justice instead of seeking revenge. Because her father had been right all along. Real warriors do know when to fight and when to wait. But what he'd never told her, what she'd had to learn in the crucible of Tyler Morrison's hatred, was that sometimes the greatest victory comes from teaching others that the waiting is over. That justice, like art, is worth creating from scratch. That even base housing kids can summon helicopters when the world forgets that everyone deserves to belong.